when a new homeowner was told by the HOA president that he didn't own his own lake. He pulled out proof that not only shocked the neighborhood, but shattered her power for good. Do you really think one person can own a lake? That's the first thing Elaine Porter said to him. No hello, no welcome to the neighborhood. Just that sharp question tossed out like a challenge, and in that instant, Anthony McAllister realized his dream home was about to come. With a nightmare attached, Anthony was 42, a mechanical engineer, who'd work his way up in a design firm in Columbus, Ohio. After years of city noise, constant deadlines, and apartment living, he finally had the money to buy the kind of home he'd always wanted. He found it in Lake Keowee, South Carolina, a peaceful stretch of water lined with docks and framed by tall pines. The house itself wasn't a mansion, just a sturdy two-story with a porch that faced the water. But for him it was paradise. He arrived with boxes, a U-Haul, and his sister's old golden retriever. Max, as he unloaded the truck, he kept looking at the lake. Taking it in, the water shimmered like glass. The docks stretched quietly into the distance. He thought, this is mine, I finally made it. Then came Elaine. She walked over from her house across the cul-de-sac, tall, lean and dressed in a pastel cardigan despite the heat. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked like it might ache. She held a clipboard, the kind you only carry if you're already looking to take notes on someone's mistakes. You're Anthony, right? She asked, not waiting for him to answer before continuing. I'm Elaine Porter, HOA president. We should have a chat about the lake. Anthony set down the box in his hands. The lake, yes, she said crisply, as though it were obvious. It belongs to the neighborhood. Everyone uses it. We'll need to get your signature to ensure access. He blinked. Wait, what? The lake came with the property, and the deed included the docks. Elaine's smile was tight, more like a grimace. That's not how it works here. We've always managed access. It's tradition. That was his introduction. No casserole, no handshake, just a demand. Anthony, trying to stay polite, wiped his hands on his jeans. Look, I'm just getting settled. We can talk later. Her eyes narrowed. The sooner you sign, the better. Otherwise things get complicated. And with that she walked away, clipboard tucked under her arm. Step sharp and quick, Anthony stood there in the driveway, the late afternoon sun hitting his shoulders, thinking about what she'd just said. Complicated. He'd only been here for 4 hours. How could things already be complicated? Later that evening, as he sat on the porch eating takeout, Max stretched at his feet. He watched a group of kids racing bikes along the street. A couple waved at him. He waved back. A man 2 houses down nodded hello. For a moment it felt normal, safe, but the words kept playing in his head. Do you really think one person can own a lake? That night Anthony dug out the folder of papers he'd signed at closing. He flipped through the documents. Rereading every line there, it was clear as day. Lake access rights, private docks, property lines extending into the water. He wasn't imagining it, he wasn't confused. It was legal and it was his. Still a question gnawed at him. Why would she insist otherwise? Was it just arrogance, control? Or was something deeper going on in this neighborhood that he hadn't yet seen? The next morning, as he was sipping coffee by the water, a man in his 60s strolled by. Fishing pole in hand, he tipped his cap. You're the new guy, Anthony smiled. Yeah, Anthony McAllister, Don Harris, the man said, pointing toward a blue house up the hill. Good spot you got here, quiet unless the HOA stirs things up. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Funny you say that. Elaine came by yesterday talking about the lake. Don chuckled, though it wasn't a friendly sound. Of course she did. That woman thinks the whole world is a backyard. You'll see, Anthony frowned. She said the lake belongs to the neighborhood. But the deed says otherwise. Don leaned on his pole. She's been pushing that story for years. Folks go along because it's easier than fighting her. But you, he gave a small shrug. You actually own it. She's not gonna like that. Anthony felt his stomach tighten. So it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something bigger, a battle he hadn't asked for. But Anthony had no idea that Elaine wasn't just stubborn. She was ruthless, and she'd stop at nothing to keep her grip on the lake. Anthony didn't have to wait long for Elaine to return. 2 days later, just as he was setting up his workshop in the garage, he heard the sound of heels clicking against the driveway. He sighed before he even looked up. There she was again, clipboard in hand. Lips pressed into a thin line. Anthony, she said, standing in the doorway like she owned the place. We need to settle this lake issue before it gets out of hand. He put down his drill and wiped his hands on a rag. Good morning to you too, Elaine. What exactly is out of hand? Because from where I'm standing, nothing's happened except you barging into my garage. Her eyes narrowed at the word barging, but she pressed on the HOA board meets next week. If you don't sign the access agreement before then, it could create unnecessary conflict. Nobody wants that. Anthony leaned against his workbench, crossing his arms. Conflict, Elaine. I'm not looking for trouble. I bought this house and with it came the lake rights. I have the paperwork, it's all legal. What you're asking me to do is give up something I bought and paid for. Her voice dropped into a tone that reminded him of a boss, scolding, and in turn, you don't understand. This isn't about paperwork. It's about community. This neighborhood has shared the lake for decades. People fish there, swim there, host barbecues by the docks. It's tradition, you can't just change that. Anthony shook his head. I'm not changing anything. But the difference is now it's my choice who uses it. That's how property ownership works. For a moment, Elaine's mask slipped. Her jaw tightened, her fingers clutched the edge of the clipboard, and he caught a flash of irritation in her eyes. She didn't like being challenged. Not one bit. You should be careful, she said softly, almost like a threat. People don't take kindly to outsiders who make life harder. Anthony took a step forward. Not aggressive, just enough to make his point. And I don't take kindly to being bullied. If you want to talk about community, how about starting with respect? She held his gaze for a long moment, then exhaled through her nose. Fine, have it your way for now. But the board will have something to say about this. With that, she turned and walked briskly back up the driveway. Anthony stood there, rag in hand, pulse racing. He wasn't used to confrontation, but he wasn't about to let someone strong-arm him out of what was rightfully his. That evening he called his realtor, Jessica Ramirez, a sharp, no-nonsense professional who had guided him through the closing. Jessica, quick question. He said the HOA president here keeps insisting the lake and docks belong to the neighborhood, but the deed says otherwise. I just want to make sure I'm not crazy. Jessica laughed short and sharp. You're not crazy. I checked every line myself. You own the water rights and the docks outright. That's part of why you got such a good deal. It gives you control. The HOAs never owned those. They've been freeloading all these years. So she's bluffing, absolutely. Jessica said, but she'll probably push you hard. HOAs love to test new owners, especially ones they think they can intimidate. Stand your ground. After hanging up, Anthony felt better, but only slightly. Knowing the law was on his side didn't change the fact that Elaine was determined to make this personal. The next day, Anthony was raking leaves by the edge of the property when two neighbors stopped by, a middle-aged couple. Mark and Susan Harper smiled politely but hesitated before speaking. Hi, Susan said. We wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. We brought cookies. Anthony grinned. Thank you, that's kind of you. Mark shifted uneasily. Listen, you might hear some talk about the lake. Don't take it personally, Elaine. Well, she likes control. People usually go along to keep the peace. Anthony raised an eyebrow. So you're saying I should just give in? Susan shook her head quickly. No, just be careful. She has a way of turning people against each other. And once she decides you're the enemy, it gets ugly. Anthony looked at them closely. They seemed genuine, but their nervous glances told him they didn't want to get caught on the wrong side of Elaine's wrath. He thanked them for the cookies, but the pit in his stomach deepened. Later that night, as he stood on his dock, watching the moonlight shimmer across the water, Max lying at his feet, Anthony whispered to himself, I'm not backing down. He meant it. But Elaine wasn't finished. Her next move would drag the entire neighborhood into the fight, forcing Anthony into the spotlight. Whether he wanted it or not, by the weekend word had spread. Anthony could feel it every time he walked outside. Curious stares from porches, hushed voices that went quiet when he passed by. It wasn't paranoia. People were talking about him, about the lake, about Elaine's claim. On Saturday morning, he decided to break the ice. He walked Max down the street, nodding at the neighbors he passed. Some smiled politely, others looked away. When he reached the corner, he spotted a small group gathered around a folding table, where a woman was selling muffins for a local fundraiser. He approached with a friendly wave. Morning, I'm Anthony, just moved in by the lake. The woman behind the table introduced herself as Pamela Green, a retired teacher with silver hair and a warm smile. Yes, we heard about you. Welcome. You picked one of the nicest spots in the whole neighborhood. Thank you, Anthony said. Relieved at her kindness, it's been a dream of mine for years. A man standing nearby, Bill Kramer, crossed his arms, dream for you maybe. But for the rest of us, it's tradition. Folks have always had access to that lake. Kids learn to fish, their families host cookouts. That's how it's been since my father lived here. Anthony kept his tone calm. I'm not trying to stop anyone from enjoying life. But I bought the house with the lake rights. It's in the deed, I didn't make the rules. I just followed them. Bill's eyes narrowed. Sounds like you're looking to change everything. Elaine says you want to cut us off. Pamela shot him a look. Bill, don't start. Nobody's cut off from anything yet. She turned to Anthony. What she means is people are nervous. Change isn't easy. Anthony nodded slowly. I get that, but I don't want to be bullied into giving something away. I work hard for this. Bill muttered something under his breath and walked off. Pamela sighed. Don't mind him. He worships Elaine, always has. But others see things differently. He worships Elaine, always has. But others see things differently. As Anthony walked back home, he passed another neighbor mowing his lawn. The man shut off the engine and called out, "Hey, you're the lake guy, right?" Anthony stopped. That's me. The man jogged over, wiping sweat from his brow. Name's Randy Choute. Look, I'll keep it short. Elaine's full of herself. She's been running the HOA like it's her personal kingdom. If you've got the papers proving you own the docks, don't let her push you around. Some of us are sick of her games. Anthony felt a flicker of relief. Good to know not everyone's against me. Randy grinned. Far from it. But most folks are scared to say anything. You stand up to her, you'll see who's really on your side. By Sunday, the tension was impossible to ignore. Kids still rode bikes down the street, but parents pulled them closer when Anthony walked by, as though just being near him might stir trouble. One woman waved and then quickly glanced around, checking if anyone had noticed. That evening, Pamela stopped by with a pie. I thought you might like something homemade. And I wanted to warn you, Elaine's been making calls. She's painting you as the bad guy, telling people you're threatening to lock up the lake. Anthony rubbed his forehead. That's not true. I never said that. Pamela set the pie on the porch railing. I know, but perception is everything here. Once Elaine plants an idea, it spreads faster than wildfire. Anthony exhaled. So what do I do? Sit back while she turns the whole neighborhood against me? Pamela looked at him with sympathy. You can't outshout her, but you can be steady. People notice the difference between lies and truth over time. He thanked her, but after she left, he felt the weight of the situation pressing down harder than ever. Owning property was supposed to mean security, not suspicion. That night, he took Max for a walk by the water. Across the lake, he saw a group of families gathered on the docks, laughing and roasting marshmallows over a small fire pit. He wondered if they'd still be so welcoming if he showed up. Or would they see him as the intruder Elaine had painted him to be? Standing there, Anthony realized this wasn't just about legal rights. It was about belonging. Elaine wasn't just challenging his deed. She was challenging his place in the community. But Anthony wasn't the type to back down quietly, and the more Elaine pushed, the more determined he became to dig into the truth about why the HOA had operated this way for so long. By Monday morning, Anthony's curiosity had hardened into determination. He couldn't just rely on what the neighbors were whispering, or on Elaine's half-truths. He needed facts. Something solid he could lean on when the HOA came knocking. So he drove into Pickens County Courthouse. A half-hour away, the old stone building stood across from a diner, with a neon sign that flickered in the morning haze. Inside, the smell of paper and polish filled the air. He headed straight for the records office, a quiet space lined with shelves and humming computers. At the desk sat Janet Cole, a clerk in her 50s with glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up as Anthony approached. Morning, she said. Need some records, yes'm. Anthony replied, I just moved into a property on Lake Kiowa, and I need to confirm the deed includes water and dock rights. Janet raised an eyebrow. Address. He gave it, and she tapped at the keyboard, fingers quick and practiced. After a few minutes, she slid a folder across the desk. Here you go, clear as day. Property lines extend 30 feet into the water. Dock rights exclusive to the lot owner. Been that way since 1979. Anthony leafed through the papers, feeling a strange mix of relief and irritation. Relief that he was right, irritation that Elaine's campaign against him was built on nothing more than bluff and bluster. Janet leaned forward. You're not the first to ask about that property. Folks from the Homeowners Association came poking around. A couple of years back wanted to see if they could file a claim. Anthony froze a claim on what grounds? None really, Janet said with a shrug. They didn't own the rights. Never did, but sometimes groups like that think. If they repeat something long enough, it becomes true. That nugget of information stuck with him the whole drive back. Elaine hadn't just been bluffing for convenience. She'd been trying to rewrite history. Back home, Anthony spread the documents across his dining table. He took photos, scanned them, and made a folder labeled Lake Rights. Proof if Elaine wanted a fight. He'd be ready later that afternoon. Randy stopped by curiosity written all over his face. So did you find anything? Anthony held up the paperwork. More than enough. The lake rights have belonged to this property for decades. The HOA never had control. They've just been acting like they did. Randy let out a low whistle. Figures Elaine loves power. But you've got her cornered now. Anthony wasn't so sure cornered. People get desperate that evening. He decided to test the waters. He walked to the end of his dock where a few teenagers were fishing. Hey fellas, he said casually, just so you know. This dock is private property now. I don't mind you being here today. But going forward, I'll need to set some ground rules. The kids exchanged nervous glances. One of them, tall and blanky, said, "But Mrs. Porter said this lake belongs to everybody." Anthony sighed. "She's wrong. I have the deed to prove it. I'm not saying nobody can use it. But it's my decision, not hers." The boys muttered among themselves and eventually packed up, walking off with their fishing rods slung over their shoulders. Anthony felt a pang of guilt. He wasn't trying to spoil anyone's fun, but he also knew letting it slide would only feed Elaine's narrative. That night his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Mr. McAllister." A voice said, "This is Charles Benton, Vice President of the HOA Board. We need to talk." Anthony braced himself. "About the lake, I assume, yes. Elaine tells us you're claiming exclusive rights. That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation, Charles. It's fact. I have the documents right here. You're welcome to see them." There was a pause. "Bring them to the meeting Wednesday evening. 7 o'clock at the clubhouse. We'll let the board decide." Anthony almost laughed. The board doesn't get to decide on private property rights. But fine, I'll be there with proof. When he hung up, he felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a showdown with Elaine pulling the strings, and the board ready to play judge and jury. As he poured himself a glass of water, he stared out at the lake, the moonlight rippling across its surface. He whispered to himself, "This isn't just about a DOC. It's about standing my ground." But Anthony had no idea that Wednesday's meeting would ignite tensions, far beyond paperwork, because Elaine knew how to stir a crowd, and she was ready to make him the villain in front of everyone. Wednesday evening arrived, heavy with humidity and tension. Anthony walked toward the clubhouse at the end of Westover Lane, Max tugging on the leash at his side. Cars lined both sides of the street, more than he expected for a midweek HOA meeting. Porch lights glowed as neighbors drifted toward the building, murmuring to one another, some glancing at him like he was walking into a courtroom, instead of a neighborhood gathering. Inside, the clubhouse smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, all facing a long table at the front where Elaine sat in the center. Like a judge, Charles Benton sat beside her, gray hair combed flat, adjusting his glasses every few seconds. The rest of the board filled out the table, each with a stack of papers in front of them. Anthony found a seat near the front. A hush fell as Elaine tapped her pen against the table. "Let's come to order," she said. Her voice carried easily across the room. "We have a pressing matter tonight. Access to the lake and the rights concerning the docks. Our new neighbor, Mr. McAllister, has raised concerns." Heads turned toward Anthony. He stood holding the folder of documents. "Not concerns, facts. I own the lake access and the docks. It's in the deed, and I have the legal papers to prove it." He spread the copies across the board's table. His voice calm but steady. Elaine glanced at the papers, then looked back up with a practiced smile. "While Mr. McAllister believes he has exclusive rights, this community has always treated the lake as shared. Generations of families have enjoyed it freely. It's tradition, and tradition carries weight." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Anthony took a breath. "Tradition doesn't overrule the law. Look for yourselves. The property lines extend into the water. The dock rights are exclusive. The HOA never owned them. Charles Benton leaned forward. Squinting at the papers, these look legitimate, he admitted slowly. Elaine cut in sharply. Legitimate on paper perhaps. But is it in the spirit of community? That's the real question. Do we want one man deciding who can fish, swim, or gather at the lake? Someone in the crowd called out. Of course not, others muttered. Nodding in agreement, Anthony felt the heat rising in his chest. But he kept his tone even. I didn't come here to be the bad guy. I'm not saying people can't use the lake. I'm saying Elaine doesn't get to decide for me. She's been acting like she owned something that was never hers. To begin with, the room shifted uneasily. A few faces showed surprise, one older man in the back. Frank Delaney raised his hand, his right. I looked into this years ago when I thought about buying that property. The rights belong to the homeowner. Not the H. We've been living off a handshake deal all this time. Elaine's smile faltered for a split second before she leaned forward. Frank, with respect, you're misremembering. The board has always had authority. Authority based on what? Anthony challenged. Show me one document, one legal claim. You can't because it doesn't exist. Voices began rising, some siding with Anthony, others defending Elaine. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors argued back and forth. Finally, Charles raised his hand for quiet enough. We can't resolve this tonight. The board will review the documents, consult legal counsel, and provide clarity at the next meeting. Elaine's lips tightened, but she nodded very well. In the meantime, I urge everyone to remain civil. This is about community, not conflict. Anthony gathered his papers, tucking them back into the folder. He could feel eyes on him as he walked out, whispers chasing him to the door. Outside, the air was thick and heavy, crickets chirping in the grass. He stood for a moment, letting Max sniff the bushes, trying to steady his breathing. As he headed home, Pamela caught up with him. You did well in there, she said quietly. You kept calm, you had the proof. But Elaine won't let this go. She thrives on drama. Anthony nodded. I could tell she's not after fairness. She's after control. Pamela gave a small, sympathetic smile. You're right. And that makes her dangerous. Back at the house, Anthony sat on the porch with a glass of water, staring at the lake under the faint glow of moonlight. He thought about Frank's words, about Pamela's warning, about Elaine's smug smile. When she realized she could sway a crowd with emotion, instead of facts. But if Elaine thought the meeting had weakened him, she was wrong. Her performance only steeled his resolve. And soon she would escalate the fight in ways Anthony hadn't imagined. The days after the meeting felt different. The neighborhood wasn't just watching Anthony anymore. They were choosing sides when he jogged with Max in the morning. Some neighbors waved, but others turned their backs. Conversations cut short when he walked past. It wasn't open hostility, but it was clear Elaine's words had stuck. On Thursday, a white envelope appeared in his mailbox with the HOA's letterhead. Inside was a notice of violation. Unauthorized fencing materials in view of the street. Anthony stared at it, baffled. He didn't have a fence, he didn't even have materials lying around. That afternoon, he called the number at the bottom of the notice. Charles Benton answered. Charles, this is Anthony McAllister. I just got a violation notice about a fence. I don't have a fence. There was an awkward pause. That must be a clerical error. I'll look into it. Anthony's jaw tightened. A clerical error that just happened to show up right after the meeting. Charles cleared his throat. We'll correct it. Goodbye. Click. By Saturday, another envelope arrived. This one claimed his dock was in violation of HOA safety codes. Loose boards, inadequate lighting. Anthony walked the entire length of the dock twice. Every plank was solid, every post sturdy. The only thing inadequate was Elaine's patience. That evening, Randy stopped by shaking his head. She's gunning for you, man. That's her playbook when she can't win outright. She buries people in fines and violations until they cave. Anthony exhaled through his nose. She picked the wrong guy. I'm not folding. Still, the pressure was real. When he went to the grocery store in town, he overheard two women by the produce aisle whispering, "That's the one causing trouble with the lake." At church on Sunday, a few people gave him polite but distant nods. He wasn't just new anymore. He was marked one evening as he sat on the porch with Pamela, who'd stopped by to check in. He asked, why do people let her get away with this? Everyone knows she's wrong. Pamela sighed, sipping her iced tea. Because she scares them. Elaine knows how to twist the rules. She finds little things, trash cans out too long grass. An inch too high and she makes life miserable until people give in. Most folks figure it's easier to nod along than fight. Anthony leaned back staring at the sky. So it's fear not loyalty, Pamela gave a sad smile exactly. The next week, Anthony found a handwritten note taped to his front door. Keep the lake open, don't ruin this for everyone. No signature, the letters were bold. Almost gouged into the paper. Max growled at it as if he sensed something was off. Anthony folded the note and slid it into his folder. With the other documents, he wasn't about to throw away evidence. That night, as he walked Max by the water, he saw flashlights bobbing near his dock. He called out, "Who's there?" 2 teenagers scrambled away, their sneakers slapping against the boards. He caught a glimpse of fishing poles in their hands, before they vanished into the dark. He knew kids were just being kids, but he also knew Elaine was behind the narrative, that the lake was still public property. The next morning he spotted Elaine at the mailbox, speaking animatedly to a small cluster of neighbors. When she saw him, her smile turned sharp. "Morning, Anthony," she said, her voice carrying across the street. "I hear you've been scaring children off the dock. That's not very neighborly." Anthony walked closer, keeping his voice calm. "They were trespassing, I asked them to leave." That's all. Elaine tilted her head. "See, this is what I've been warning people about, one man trying to shut down a tradition. This neighborhood is built on trust and sharing. But now we are told we need permission to enjoy what's always been ours." The neighbors muttered, a few nodded, though Anthony noticed Pamela and Randy frowning. He spoke clearly, making sure everyone heard. "It's not about shutting anyone out. It's about honesty. Elaine keeps saying the HOA owns the lake, but the deed says otherwise. She's been lying to you for years." Elaine's eyes flashed. "That's enough." Anthony held up the folder. "I'll show anyone here the documents. You don't have to take my word for it. You deserve the truth." For a brief moment, silence hung heavy, then Frank Delaney stepped forward from the crowd. "I've seen those papers, he's telling the truth." Elaine's smile wavered, but she recovered quickly. Her voice sharp. "We'll let the board decide next week. Until then, I suggest you keep your accusations to yourself, Anthony. It would be a shame if your violations piled up further." Anthony clenched his jaw but stayed silent. The crowd began to disperse, whispers swirling in the humid air. But even as Elaine's tactics grew bolder, Anthony was about to discover he wasn't alone. Others were ready to step forward, and together they would challenge her grip on the neighborhood. Monday evening, Anthony was tightening a hinge on the back porch door when he heard footsteps crunching on the gravel. He turned to see Randy approaching, this time with his wife Melissa Choke, carrying a plate covered in foil. "Thought you might like some dinner," Melissa said with a smile. "Randy told me you've had a rough week." Anthony set down his screwdriver. "That's thoughtful, thank you. Come on up." They sat around the patio table, Max lying beneath it, tail thumping lazily. Randy leaned forward, voice low. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said the other day, about Elaine lying to people. You're right, and I'm tired of watching her get away with it." Melissa nodded. "We've lived here 8 years. Every time someone challenges her, she buries them in fines until they sell. That's what she wants, to scare folks into silence. But you're different, you've got the deed on your side." Anthony gave a half smile. "Doesn't feel like much of an advantage when the whole neighborhood thinks I'm trying to steal their lake. That's why you need allies." Melissa said firmly, "You can't fight her alone. People like Pamela, Frank, and us. We are ready to stand with you, we just need to be organized." Anthony felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time since moving in, he didn't feel entirely isolated. The following night, Pamela hosted a small gathering at her house. When Anthony arrived, he found a handful of neighbors seated around her living room. Frank Delaney sat in an armchair sipping sweet tea. Melissa and Randy were on the couch. Another couple, Thomas and Julia UN, waved him over. Pamela clapped her hands together. "All right, let's be honest. Elaine has been running this HOA unchecked for too long. Anthony's situation just shines a light on it. If we don't push back now, she'll keep steamrolling people." Frank cleared his throat. "I'll admit I used to go along with her because it was easier. But enough's enough. When I bought my place, I read the HOA bylaws backward and forward. Nowhere does it mention lake rights. She's been bluffing this whole time." Anthony opened his folder and spread the papers across the coffee table. "Here's the deed, you can see for yourselves. My property includes the dock rights, not the HOA, not Elaine me." The group leaned in, studying the documents. Thomas shook his head. It's black and white. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. Julia frowned. Then why does everyone act like she does? Pamela answered for him because fear works. Elaine knows how to isolate people. Make them feel like outsiders, but if enough of us push back, she can't punish everyone. Randy leaned forward. So what's the plan? Just keep showing up to meetings and letting her twist things. Anthony felt the room's eyes shift to him. He wasn't used to leading groups. But the moment demanded it. The plan is simple truth. We get the word out, show people the documents. Explain the history, make it clear she's been misleading them. She can only control people if they stay in the dark. Melissa nodded. And if she tries to retaliate? Anthony held her gaze. Then we stand together. If she wants to bury one person in fines, fine, but she can't bury us all. The room grew quiet for a long moment. The only sound was Max shifting beneath the table. Then Pamela spoke. I'll print copies of the deed. I'll hand them out myself. People deserve to see the truth. Frank raised his glass. Count me in. The others murmured agreement. For the first time, Anthony felt the tide shift. Not in his favor completely, but enough to give him hope. As he walked home later that night, Randy clapped him on the back. Feels good, doesn't it? Not being alone, Anthony smiled. Yeah, feels like we actually have a shot. Back on his porch, Anthony looked out at the lake. The water dark and still under the stars. He thought about Elaine. About the smug look on her face at the last meeting. He knew she wouldn't back down. She'd double down harder than ever. But now at least he had people willing to stand with him. But Elaine had no intention of letting her grip loosen. In fact, her next move would push everything to a breaking point. One that could either crush Anthony or finally expose her for what she really was. The breaking point came on a muggy Friday night, 1 week after the small gathering at Pamela's. Anthony had just finished dinner when a pounding knock rattled his front door. Max barked furiously, paws skidding across the hardwood. Anthony opened the door to find Elaine standing there, with 2 HOA board members, Charles Benton and Margaret Lyons, flanking her like bodyguards. Elaine's lips curled into a tight smile. Anthony, she said, her voice sweet but sharp enough to cut. We need to talk about your doc again. Anthony crossed his arms. What now? Elaine handed him a letter. This is a final notice. Your dock is being deemed unsafe for community use. Unless repairs are completed to HOA standards within 30 days. It will be removed. Anthony scanned the letter. Anger bubbling in his chest. Unsafe, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's not for community use. It's private property. Elaine's eyes glittered. You can wave your papers around all you like. But perception matters. People feel like you're shutting them out. That makes you a problem. Anthony took a step forward, his voice firm. No, Elaine. The problem is you've lied to this neighborhood for years, pretending the HOA owns something it never did. That stops now. Charles shifted uncomfortably. But Margaret spoke up, her voice thin. We are just trying to keep peace. Mr. McAllister, everyone's upset. Anthony looked at her, then back at Elaine. Peace doesn't come from lies. And I won't be bullied into giving up what's mine. Elaine's smile snapped into a scowl. Then you'll regret it. She turned on her heel, storming off, with Charles and Margaret trailing behind. Anthony stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, the night air pressing against him like a weight. The next morning he walked down to the dock with Max. What he saw stopped him cold. Someone had spray painted across the wooden planks. In dripping red letters, selfish. Anthony's hands clenched into fists. He crouched down, running his fingers over the sticky paint. Max whined at his side, sensing his frustration. Later that afternoon he called Pamela, who arrived with Frank and Randy. They stood staring at the vandalized dock. Shaking their heads. She's escalating, Randy muttered. This is no longer just fines and letters. This is intimidation. Pamela touched Anthony's arm. You can't let her scare you. That's exactly what she wants. Frank, quiet until now, spoke with a low growl in his voice. This isn't just about a lake anymore. This is about whether one person gets to bully an entire community into submission. Anthony nodded slowly. Then we push back harder than ever. That evening the small group gathered again at Pamela's. Copies of Anthony's deed were spread across the table. Pamela had already started passing them around the neighborhood, discreetly sliding them under doors, mailing them to households. Melissa leaned forward. We need to show up at the next meeting. All of us together, and not just us. We bring others who are tired of Elaine. She thrives on silence, so we make sure she doesn't get it. Thomason tapped the table, and if she tries to drown us out. Anthony's voice was steady. Then we keep speaking calm, firm with proof in hand. If we stand together, she can't twist it. The group agreed for the first time. The plan felt real, but Elaine wasn't waiting for the next meeting. On Sunday morning, as Anthony returned from walking Max, he found a small crowd gathered on the cul-de-sac. Elaine was standing in the center, clipboard raised like a scepter. "Neighbors," she called out, "we have a crisis. Our lake is under threat. One man believes he can take it away from us. He believes his papers matter more than decades of community spirit. Is this what we want?" The crowd murmured. Some shouting no. Anthony stepped forward. Holding his folder high. "You're being lied to," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the noise. "I have the deed. The HOA never owned this lake. Elaine has been feeding you a false story for years." Elaine whipped toward him, face red. "Don't listen to him. His twisting words trying to divide us." Pamela pushed through the crowd, raising her own copy of the deed. "No, Elaine. He's telling the truth. I've seen the papers myself." Frank and Randy stepped beside her, nodding. Soon Thomas and Julia joined, then Melissa, one by one. More neighbors began shifting uneasily, looking between Elaine's fury and the calm conviction of those holding proof. The tension hung thick like the moment before a storm breaks. But this confrontation on the cul-de-sac was only the spark. What came next would determine whether Anthony could finally break Elaine's hold, or be swallowed by the very community he had hoped to call home. The HOA meeting the following Wednesday wasn't just another routine gathering. It was the showdown everyone in the neighborhood had been waiting for. Cars filled the clubhouse parking lot and spilled onto the grass. Inside, every chair was taken, with people standing along the back wall whispering nervously. The air was charged thicker than before, as though the entire community knew a line was about to be drawn. Anthony arrived with his folder tucked firmly under his arm. This time he wasn't alone. Pamela, Frank, Randy, Melissa, and the Yangs flanked him as they entered. Their presence was quiet but powerful, a small signal that the tide had shifted. Elaine sat at the head table, expression smooth but eyes sharp. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Charles Benton and Margaret Lyons were beside her. Both visibly uneasy, Elaine cleared her throat. "We are here to address the ongoing dispute regarding lake access. Mr. McAllister continues to claim ownership rights that threaten the spirit of our community. Tonight the board will make a determination." Anthony stood before she could go further. "With all due respect, the board doesn't have the power to decide private property rights. This isn't up for interpretation, it's a matter of law." He laid the deed and supporting documents across the table once more, his voice steady. "Here is the proof. This property has exclusive lake and dock rights dating back to 1979. Every closing document, every legal survey confirms it. The HOA has never owned these rights. What Elaine has been telling you all is false." A ripple went through the room. People craned their necks to see the papers. Some whispered, others stared at Elaine. Pamela rose from her seat, holding her own copy high. "I've reviewed them myself. They're real. Elaine has been misleading us." Frank stood, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "And I checked the county records years ago. Anthony's right. Elaine's been bluffing." Elaine slammed her pen on the table. "This is outrageous. You're turning neighbors against each other. For decades this lake has been shared. That's what makes us a community. Are we really going to let one man rewrite history?" Anthony met her glare. "I'm not rewriting history. I'm correcting it. The truth doesn't change because it's inconvenient. You've built your authority on a lie, and people deserve to know it." Margaret shifted in her seat, glancing at Charles finally. Charles spoke, his voice quiet but firm. His right. "I've reviewed the documents myself. They're valid. We can't claim ownership." "We don't have." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elaine's face flushed crimson. "Charles, you can't be serious." "I am." Charles interrupted, removing his glasses. "We've overstepped. If we keep pushing this, the HOA could face legal consequences. We need to back down." The room erupted. Some cheered, others argued. Voices overlapped until Pamela stood again, raising her hands. "Enough. This isn't about sides, it's about honesty. We all love this neighborhood. But love doesn't mean giving one person the power to intimidate everyone else." Anthony's voice cut through the noise. "I'm not here to lock anyone out. I'm here to live in peace. If neighbors want to fish or swim, I'll allow it, but that's my decision. Not Elaine's, not the board's." All I ask is respect for the truth. For the first time, Elaine looked shaken. She tried to recover, straightening in her chair. You'll regret this. You'll see what happens when people turn on you. But her words rang hollow. More and more neighbors were shifting toward Anthony's side, murmuring their agreement, nodding at Pamela and Frank. The room no longer carried the same fear it once had. The spell was breaking. Charles leaned forward. Voice firm, this matter is closed. The board acknowledges Mr. McAllister's ownership of the lake and docks. The HOA will no longer interfere. Elaine's pen slipped from her hand, clattering against the table. For a moment her mask cracked. Fury, disbelief, and helplessness flickered across her face. Then she gathered her papers, stood abruptly, and stormed out of the room. The silence she left behind was deafening. Then slowly people began to clap. First Pamela, then Randy, then more, until the sound filled the clubhouse. It wasn't just support for Anthony. It was relief, the release of years of control finally snapping. Anthony felt his shoulders ease for the first time since he'd moved in. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of neighbors who days earlier had avoided his gaze. Now they saw him differently. Not as an outsider, but as someone who stood up when others couldn't. But even with Elaine gone from the room, Anthony knew the real challenge wasn't just winning this battle. It was what came next: rebuilding trust, and showing the neighborhood that truth and fairness could hold stronger than fear. The days after the meeting felt like a storm had finally passed. For the first time since moving in, Anthony could walk through the neighborhood without feeling every pair of eyes on him. Neighbors who had once crossed the street now stopped to chat. Kids waved as they biked past his driveway. Even small gestures, like someone leaving a basket of tomatoes from their garden at his door, carried more weight than words. Elaine, on the other hand, seemed to vanish. She resigned from the board within a week, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew better. Rumor had it she was still bitter, retreating behind her curtains. While the neighborhood moved on without her iron grip, the HON, now led by Charles, operated with more transparency. Notices became less about punishment and more about reminders. Meetings ran shorter, calmer. The tension that had choked the community began to loosen. Anthony spent more time by the water, Max at his side, neighbors occasionally stopping by the dock. One afternoon Pamela joined him with a folding chair and sweet tea. "You know," she said, watching the ripples on the lake, "you did more than protect your property. You reminded people that truth matters. That one voice can make a difference." Anthony shook his head lightly. "I didn't feel like much of a difference at first. I just felt cornered." Pamela smiled. "That's the thing, standing your ground doesn't always feel noble. In the moment it feels lonely. But look around, people are freer now because you refuse to bend." As if on cue, Randy wandered down with Melissa carrying a cooler. They set up chairs, chatting easily. Soon Frank appeared with his grandson, teaching him how to cast a line. Before long, laughter echoed off the water. Anthony realized this was what he'd been searching for when he bought the house. Not just peace, but belonging. And strangely, it had come not in spite of the conflict, but because of it. One evening, while grilling on the porch, he caught sight of two teenagers, the same boys he'd once asked to leave the dock. They hovered uncertainly near the water's edge. Fishing poles in hand, Anthony waved them over. "Go ahead," he called. "You can fish, just take care of the dock." Their faces lit up. "Thanks, Mr. McAllister," they shouted before running onto the boards. Anthony watched them settle in, feeling something shift inside him. Owning the rights wasn't about keeping people out. It was about setting boundaries rooted in respect. And when respect was mutual, everyone gained. The lesson wasn't just about property or paperwork. It was about how fear loses power the moment people stop feeding it. Elaine had thrived because she convinced her neighbors to stay quiet, to choose comfort over truth. But the second enough people stood together, her authority collapsed. Anthony had learned that sometimes doing the right thing means being uncomfortable, even unpopular for a while. But if you stay calm, steady, and truthful, people eventually recognize it. As summer stretched on the lake became a gathering place again, not because Elaine decreed it, but because Anthony welcomed it. Families grilled on the shore, kids splashed in the shallows, and neighbors who once whispered behind his back now shared stories beside him. One night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the water glowed orange, Anthony sat on the dock with Max at his feet. Pamela and Randy were nearby laughing with Frank. The air was filled with voices. Not whispers, belonging wasn't given. It was built plank by plank like the dock beneath him. He thought back to that first conversation. Do you really think one person can own a lake? Elaine had thrown it at him like a weapon. But the truth was, owning the rights didn't make him powerful. What mattered was how he used them, with fairness, with openness. With respect, that was the real victory. And as the laughter carried over the water, Anthony realized he'd not only defended his home, he'd helped reshape a neighborhood. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up. Even if you stand alone at first, and when you do others, find the courage to stand beside you. That's the lesson here in life. Whether it's property work or personal values, don't let fear or intimidation decide what's right. Facts matter, truth matters. And if you hold to them, you'll find people who see it too. So if this story struck a chord with you, remember to stand firm in your own battles, no matter how small they seem. And if you'd like more stories that bring lessons to life, make sure to subscribe. You never know what story might remind you of your own strength.